Welcome to the Phil and H Travel Podcast, Is It Worth It? Today we are inside Medellín, Colombia, the city that went from Pablo Escobar's murder capital to National Geographic's Best of the World 2026, and right now in the middle of one of South America's most complicated over-tourism stories. This episode covers exactly what it costs to be here, from $18 hostel dorms in Laurelist to $220 a night boutique hotels in El Poblado, the three logistics traps that catch almost every first-time visitor, the food scene that will genuinely surprise you, and the honest safety picture that cuts through both the paranoid travel advisories and the influencer hype. We look at whether the transformation is real or whether Medellín is starting to break under its own success. Best time to visit, who the city suits, and who should probably pick somewhere else. That is what today's episode is about, and we are not going to sugarcoat a single part of it.
Right. And our mission for this deep dive is, well, to act as your boots-on-the-ground analyst. We really want to decode the immense tension that is defining this city right now.
Yeah, because there is so much tension, especially when you look at the sheer volume of material we're parsing today.
Exactly. I mean, we have a massive stack of sources sitting right in front of us. We're pulling from municipal economic reports, local real estate data, sociological research on urban mobility, and of course, our own field notes.
And we are going to walk you through 11 very specific segments today, leaving absolutely no stone unturned.
That's the goal. We need to get past those curated, highly filtered social media algorithms to understand the actual mechanics of the city. By the time we finish this deep dive, you will know exactly how to navigate this environment, where the genuine value is, and honestly, how to avoid the heavily engineered traps that snare practically every first-time arrival.
So let's just jump straight into segment one, which is this massive contrarian reality that frames literally every single piece of source material we pulled.
Right, the historical perception versus the current data.
Yeah, I mean, when you say the word Medellín to anyone who is watching the evening news in the 1980s or 90s, their brain immediately autofills with a very specific, incredibly violent Hollywood narrative.
Oh, absolutely. It's almost an involuntary response for a lot of people.
But then, I'm looking at the municipal crime data for 2025, and the statistical reality just completely shatters that old perception. The homicide rate in Medellín has plummeted to 11.7 per 100,000 residents.
And to really understand the magnitude of that transformation, you have to look at the historical baseline. In 1991, this city was recording homicide rates pushing close to 380 per 100,000.
Wait, 380? That's just staggering.
It was objectively the most dangerous city on the planet at that time. So to drive that number down to 11.7 over the course of 3 decades is arguably the most successful piece of urban pacification and social engineering in modern history.
Right. It really requires an entirely new way of thinking about the city's infrastructure and its sociology. And to make that 11.7 number mean something to you, let's run a quick comparative analysis.
Yeah, let's put it into a context the listener can visualize.
So if you are sitting in the United States right now pulling up urban crime data, that statistic makes Medellín safer in terms of homicide than Indianapolis.
Which is wild to think about.
It makes it mathematically safer than Cleveland and safer than Milwaukee. But here is where I get incredibly confused and where I need you to sort of break down the cognitive dissonance for us.
Go for it. What's the disconnect?
So I see these hard, verifiable safety statistics proving the city is safer than major American hubs. But then I open the U.S. State Department website, and there is a glaring Level 3 Reconsider Travel Advisory stamped across the entire country of Colombia.
Right, the dreaded Level 3 advisory.
Yeah, and reconsider travel is not a light suggestion, It implies imminent peril. How do these two completely contradictory facts exist in the exact same moment?
So the tension you are pointing out there is actually the fundamental paradox of modern Colombia. And honestly, if you don't grasp the geography behind it, you cannot accurately assess your risk profile.
Geography is the key factor here.
Entirely. The State Department is issuing a national level advisory. When you dig into the granular intelligence reports driving that Level 3 status in our sources, the data points predominantly to complex, geographically isolated issues.
Like what, specifically?
We are talking about militant activity. Specifically, groups like the ELN operating in very remote border corridors like Arauca, or deep in the jungle regions where illicit economies still dominate.
Okay, so it's purely a proximity issue then.
Yes, 100%. We are looking at the map right now in the deep dive materials, and those conflict zones are hundreds of miles and several massive mountain ranges away from the Abura Valley where Medellín is located.
Oh, wow. So they aren't even remotely close.
Not at all. Applying the border risks of Arauca to a tourist drinking an espresso in a Medellin cafe is geographically equivalent to telling an international tourist to cancel their vacation to Chicago because there is a severe blizzard happening up in Alaska.
That is an incredibly helpful analogy.
Right. The State Department has to issue a blanket country warning, but the localized street-level reality for a visitor in the city proper has absolutely nothing to do with those remote geopolitical tensions. And to be clear, we are stating this impartially based purely on the geographical data. We aren't endorsing any political viewpoint here.
Of course. We're just looking at the objective distance between the danger zones and the tourist hubs, which is vast. That context gives you permission to actually look at the city itself without that looming sense of dread.
Exactly. So let's look at the physical profile of where we actually are. Medellin is the second largest city in Colombia.
And the demographic data we pulled shows about 2.4 million people living within the city limits. And then when you zoom out to encompass the broader metropolitan area, you are looking at over 4 million residents.
And its placement on the map is practically a geological masterpiece. The city is nestled deep inside the Aburrá Valley, flanked on all sides by the really dramatic peaks of the Andes Mountains.
Right, and sitting at an elevation of roughly 5,000 feet above sea level, which creates what I've been calling the cheat code climate.
The cheat code, it really is.
I mean, look at the historical weather data in our research stack. They call it the city of eternal spring, which, sounds like standard tourism marketing fluff, but the numbers actually back it up perfectly.
They absolutely do. The baseline temperatures here sit on a razor-thin margin. They fluctuate almost exclusively between 65 degrees and 81 degrees Fahrenheit every single day of the year.
Which is just absurd. How does that even happen mechanically?
The mechanics are actually fascinating. You have the equatorial proximity, which guarantees consistent solar radiation, right?
Yeah.
But then the 5,000-foot altitude acts as a natural air conditioner.
So it balances out the heat.
Exactly. The valley walls funnel the cool mountain breezes straight down into the urban basin.
Right, so you never get those suffocating, oppressive humidity spikes that make you want to just hide in a hotel room. And you don't get the brutal, freezing winters that require packing heavy luggage.
You also don't have a monsoon season that floods the streets for a quarter of the year. You don't have to time your vacation around the climate in the way you absolutely must for places like Southeast Asia or the Caribbean.
You literally just show up, and the weather is generally perfect. And clearly, the entire world has figured out this cheat code. Let's dig into the macro tourism data for 2026, because these numbers are just staggering.
They really are. When you look at the final reports from 2025 in our stack, airport traffic at Jose Maria Cordova International experienced an 18% year-on-year growth.
18%. That is a massive surge.
For an established, major international airport to post nearly 20% growth in a single 12-month cycle,
Right.
Well, it represents a massive, almost unmanageable influx of human logistics.
And the national revenue figures matched that surge perfectly. Colombia pulled in an astounding $11 billion in tourism revenue in 2025.
With projected international arrivals for this year hitting 6.5 million.
Right, and looking at the breakdown of origin markets in the source stack, the top 5 sources of all these arrivals are the United States, Argentina, Ecuador, Spain, and Brazil.
And analyzing those source demographics tells a very specific story about the city's current life cycle phase.
What phase is that?
The mainstream phase. The presence of massive U.S. and European volume, alongside heavy regional Latin American traffic, confirms that Medellin is officially mainstream.
So the era of this being an off-the-beaten-path, edgy destination for intrepid backpackers is completely over.
Completely over. It is a globally recognized Tier 1 tourism draw, and that mainstreaming is the underlying engine driving practically every single problem we are going to dissect in this deep dive.
Right, because the physical infrastructure, the residential housing markets, the local restaurant economy, all of these systems are currently buckling and warping under the immense weight of 6.5 million arrivals.
Which brings us perfectly into segment 2. Since we know the sheer volume of people flooding into the valley, we have to talk about how you time your entry.
Yeah, because despite the eternal spring cheat code, there is a very distinct seasonal playbook you have to follow if you want to optimize your trip, right?
Absolutely. The meteorological data outlines 2 distinct dry seasons and 2 wet seasons. If you're aiming for minimal rainfall, you target the windows of December through March, or the secondary dry season in July and August.
And the wet seasons fall in April through May, and then again from October through November. But I want to push back a little on the idea that wet season means you shouldn't go.
Oh, it's definitely not a deal breaker.
Right, because when we say wet season here, you shouldn't picture an apocalyptic all-day washout. It's more about these incredibly intense, highly theatrical afternoon thunderstorms.
Yeah, the sky turns this bruised purple color, the rain dumps heavily for 2 hours, and then it clears up.
And the payoff is huge. The surrounding Andes turn this violent, electric shade of green.
Hmm.
If you take a day trip out to the waterfalls near Guadalupe during this time, the water is just roaring. Plus, the economic data shows that accommodation prices consistently drop 20 to 30% during these wet months.
That is a very fair counter-argument for value hunters. However, if you are analyzing the calendar for peak cultural immersion, the entire conversation centers around August.
Oh, right. Because of the festival?
Exactly. That is when the city effectively stops normal operations to host the Feria de las Flores, the Festival of Flowers.
And it is an absolute spectacle. You really cannot understate the scale of this thing. It's not some quaint little botanical garden exhibit. We are talking about a massive, week-long shutdown of the city.
You have massive parades, stadium-sized open-air concerts, and mind-bending orchid displays. But the heart of the festival, the piece that actually matters historically, is the Parade of the Soletros.
Explain the Soletros for us, because they're really the key to understanding the regional identity here.
So, historically, before the modern roads were built, local farmers used these heavy wooden chairs strapped to their backs to transport goods, and sometimes even people, down the steep mountain paths into the valley.
Wow. And today, they use those exact same traditional wooden rigs to carry these enormous, intricately designed floral arrangements on their backs, marching right through the streets.
Some of these arrangements weigh upwards of 150 pounds.
It is a profoundly emotional display. It physically ties the modern, tech-driven city back to its raw agricultural roots.
It is culturally magnificent, but, and we have to be honest here, we have to deliver the harsh financial reality of attending.
Yeah, let's look at the economic data around peak season because it's pretty brutal.
During the first 2 weeks of August, and similarly during the week between Christmas and New Year's, hotel occupancy in the primary tourist corridors consistently breaches 90%.
And when occupancy hits 90%, human empathy just leaves the chat, and the algorithms take total control of the pricing.
That is precisely how the revenue management software is designed to work. A standard mid-range boutique room that might cost you an entirely reasonable $80 a night in late February will instantaneously double.
It leaps to $160, sometimes $200 a night. The pricing completely detaches from the baseline economic reality of the local currency and operates purely on foreign demand.
So, looking at the calendar, factoring in the rain, the crowds, and the algorithmic price gouging, when is the actual sweet spot for the listener?
According to the consensus across the travel literature and the pricing data we pulled, it points to March and April.
Why those months specifically?
You are capturing the optimal intersection of variables. You secure shoulder season pricing well before the North American summer rush begins. The weather patterns are still predominantly dry, and the city retains its vibrant, electric atmosphere without feeling like you are waiting in line for a theme park ride.
But the word crowds is tricky here, because when you look at the geographic distribution of those 6.5 million tourists, they aren't spreading out evenly across a metro area of 4 million people.
Not at all. They are highly, almost comically concentrated. The over-tourism problem in Medellín has a very specific zip code. It's the El Poblado problem.
The concentration of foreign capital and foreign bodies in El Poblado is a fascinating study in urban monoculture.
It feels like an exact replica. If you walk down stretches of Avenida El Poblado on a Friday afternoon, it looks like someone took the Kangu neighborhood in Bali and just copy-pasted it right into the Andes.
The architectural and cultural homogenization is striking.
You have the exact same industrial chic aesthetic, the exact same digital nomad coffee shops with 50 people silently staring at MacBooks, the exact same overpriced Aussie smoothie bowls, and the exact same hostel bars blasting deep house music.
As you noted, the aesthetic is so globally standardized that, aside from the occasional Spanish menu, you are completely insulated from the host country. You are basically existing in a transient, borderless bubble designed to mimic the exact comforts of Brooklyn or Berlin.
It's an aesthetic tax. You aren't paying for better coffee. You're paying an anxiety premium to consume that coffee in a space that feels utterly familiar and unchallenged by the outside world.
And the solution we pulled from every piece of local advice in our source stack is aggressive but necessary.
You have to deliberately put in the physical effort to escape that bubble. You have to actively choose to access the actual city.
You have to walk the tree-lined residential streets of Laureles. You have to explore the generational family neighborhoods in Envigado.
You have to ride the cable cars up to Parque Arvi, and you have to engage with the hillside comunas. Because if you allow inertia to keep you in El Poblado, you will fly home having never actually visited Colombia.
And escaping that bubble requires understanding the physical infrastructure of the city, which leads us directly into segment 3, the first impressions and the logistics of arrival.
Right, because the very first hurdle catches an astonishing number of travelers entirely off guard. The arrival disorientation. It is wild how many people mess this up.
It really is a massive blind spot.
You go online, you book a flight to Medellín, you land at Jose Maria Cordova International Airport, the airport code is MDE, you grab your bags, and you naturally assume you are in the city. But you aren't.
The geographical reality of the Ibarra Valley dictates the infrastructure here. The valley floor is simply too narrow and too densely populated to safely house a major international runway.
So they put it somewhere else.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Therefore, the airport was built 24 miles away, up on a high plateau in an entirely different municipality called Rio Negro.
Right. So you walk out of the terminal, and you are hit with this logistical reality check. Let's break down the exact transit costs from our data stack.
If you walk up to the official line and grab a licensed white airport taxi, the flat rate is going to run you roughly 25 to 35 USD.
But Uber is fully operational here, and checking the app data, an Uber ride down into the valley typically costs between $18 and $25. And depending on the time of day, you are scrapping in for a 45-minute to a full 60-minute drive.
But we should frame that commute not merely as a logistical annoyance, but as one of the most spectacular urban introductions in the world.
Oh, absolutely. The topographical descent is genuinely cinematic. Picture this. You leave the high-altitude plateau of Rio Negro, and your driver starts navigating this massive, winding highway.
You plunge through these long mountain tunnels and lean into steep switchbacks.
And because you are dropping thousands of feet down into a steep basin, the city doesn't just appear. It reveals itself to you in layers. If you time your flight to arrive at night, it will literally take your breath away.
You come out of a tunnel, and you see this sprawling, dense, vertical metropolis. The lights climb the sheer walls of the valley, making it look like a glowing, three-dimensional circuit board pressed directly into the mountainsides.
That intense verticality is the defining characteristic of every piece of infrastructure in Medellín. Every road, every pipeline, and every public transit line has to negotiate an extreme battle against gravity.
Which is exactly why we have to pause and look at the research around the Metro Cable. Specifically, Line K, which runs from the Acevedo station at the valley floor all the way up to Arvi.
If you read the urban planning journals we pulled, this isn't just transit, it's a revolution.
The term used in the literature is social urbanism. It is crucial to understand that the Metro Cable was not designed as a scenic ride for tourists with cameras.
No, it was built as a vital, life-saving socioeconomic bridge. Prior to the installation of these gondolas, the residents living in the steepest, most impoverished hillside comunas were entirely physically and economically isolated from the formal employment opportunities down in the valley.
Imagine having to walk down thousands of uneven, dangerous concrete stairs just to get to a minimum wage job, and then having to climb them all the way back up in the dark.
It was a structural trap. But the cable car broke that trap. It integrated the marginalized periphery directly into the economic core of the city.
And the cost is the most beautiful part of the design. You just tap your integrated transit card, and it costs exactly $1 USD each way.
$1 single dollar. To float over the tin roofs and brick facades of one of the most dynamic cities in the Americas. And when that gondola sets you down at the valley floor, you transfer seamlessly onto the main metro system.
Right, which is a relentlessly clean, incredibly fast, elevated train that runs a straight north-south corridor through the absolute heart of the valley.
And if you take that metro line and disembark in the city El Centro, you are hit with an immediate visceral vibe shift that reorients your entire understanding of the city.
Vibe shift doesn't even cover it. El Centro is a sensory assault.
It really is. It is the raw, unfiltered commercial engine of the local population. You walk out of the station and there is absolutely zero curated tourist infrastructure.
No matcha lattes, no English menus.
Exactly. It is incredibly dense and aggressively loud. You have hundreds of street vendors screaming their prices over reggaeton that is just blasting out of massive speakers stacked in open shop fronts.
The air smells like heavy diesel exhaust mixed with the incredible aroma of deep-frying empanadas.
It demands total situational awareness, feeling the whiplash between the chaotic, authentic energy of El Centro and the manicured, artificial calm of El Poblado is mandatory if you want to claim you actually understand Medellin.
And navigating that whiplash requires a secure base of operations, which leads us into segment 4, the accommodation data we synthesize from the source stack.
We have broken the market down into 4 distinct traveler profiles because your budget dictates entirely which version of the city you will interact with. Let's begin with the budget traveler, operating in the $18 to $45 a night range.
If we were recording this deep dive 5 years ago, the default advice for the budget bracket would be to book a party hostel right in the middle of El Poblado, places around Parque Arvi, like the Selena or the Wandering Paisa.
And those beds still exist. You can grab a dorm bunk there for $18 to $28 a night. But looking at the current reviews and value metrics, is that actually the smart play anymore?
The consensus in the recent travel literature is no. The value proposition has definitively shifted westward across the valley to Laureles.
So what does that budget get you in Laureles?
If you deploy that same budget in Laureles, the return on investment is drastically better. Instead of cramming into a noisy 8-bed dorm with hungover backpackers, you can find smaller, independent, locally owned guest houses. For $30 to $45 a night, you secure a private room.
And more importantly, you secure a better neighborhood. Laureles is characterized by these beautiful, massive tree canopies shading circular avenues. You're staying in a place where actual middle-class Colombians live, work, and eat, rather than existing inside a neon terrarium.
Okay, moving up the ladder. The mid-range traveler. This is the demographic willing to spend $70 to $120 a night.
Ironically, this specific budget bracket is where El Poblado actually makes sense. The boutique hotel market here offers an incredibly high standard of hospitality for the price point.
We cross-reference properties like the Casa Dan Carlton and the Charlie Hotel. For that $70 to $120 range, the inclusions are remarkable.
You are not just renting a standard room. These properties feature striking modern architecture, rooftop infinity pools overlooking the valley, and fiber-optic Wi-Fi tailored specifically to the remote workforce.
Furthermore, they almost universally include a phenomenal traditional Colombian breakfast. You wake up to spreads of exotic, hyperlocal fruit, perfectly grilled arepas, and exceptional coffee.
Now, I want to challenge you on the next category, the family traveler. We are budgeting roughly $80 to $130 a night for a family of 4.
Right.
You mentioned Envigado earlier as the sanctuary for families, but I have to push back here. If Envigado is so perfectly situated right on the metro line and deeply authentic, why hasn't the digital nomad swarm completely taken it over yet? Why are we sending families there instead of keeping them central?
It is a matter of zoning and commercial infrastructure. The digital nomad economy requires a critical mass of co-working spaces, English-speaking cafes, and high-density nightlife to sustain its ecosystem.
And Envigado doesn't have that.
Exactly. Envigado, which is technically a separate municipality just south of Medellin, has fiercely protected its residential zoning laws. It hasn't allowed the rampant commercialization that fuels the party scene.
So the lack of late-night infrastructure is the actual defense mechanism.
Exactly the point. Dumping a family with young children into El Poblado on a Friday night is an auditory nightmare. The open-air clubs violate noise ordinances until 4 a.m.
In Envigado, or its neighboring district, Sabaneta, that $80 to $130 budget unlocks incredible utility. A family is not cramming into adjacent hotel rooms. They are renting a spacious 2-bedroom serviced apartment.
They have a full kitchen to mitigate meal costs, they have in-unit laundry, and they step outside onto wide, clean sidewalks leading to heavily utilized, safe local parks. It's the only logical suburban strategy.
That makes total sense. Now let's look at the top tier. The luxury or high-end traveler looking in the $200 to $280 a night range.
This bracket focuses on ultra-premium design properties, such as the Click Clack Hotel or the Marquis Medellin.
A lot of people hear $280 a night and think, well, that's just standard global pricing. What's the deal? But you have to look at the comparative economic data across Latin America.
The comparative value proposition is staggering. I want you to visualize the exact specifications of these Medellin properties: the avant-garde architectural design, the premium thread count on the linens, the personalized concierge service, the multi-tiered rooftop lounges.
Right, the whole package.
If you took that exact square footage and service level and dropped it into the chic neighborhoods of Bogota or into São Paulo, Brazil, the market data shows that room instantaneously commands $400 to $500 a night, minimum, Your luxury capital simply stretches further in the Abra Valley.
But the place your capital stretches the absolute furthest is on a plate. This brings us to segment 5, the food scene, grocery economics, and the unspoken etiquette rules.
Because the restaurant data in our sources outlines a phenomenon you've been calling the two-block tax.
Yeah, and it perfectly encapsulates the dual economy running the city. Let me break down the mechanics. If you sit down at a trendy, beautifully lit restaurant with an English menu in the Parque Arvi's tourist zone, you are walking right into the tax bracket.
You are going to pay roughly $12 to $18 for a standard main course.
And your craft cocktails are going to run $8 to $12 each. If you decide you want to try the local specialty, the bandeja paisa, at one of these highly branded Instagram-friendly spots, the menu will list it for anywhere between 55,000 to 70,000 Colombian pesos. In USD, that's about $14 to $18.
Now, let's look at the underlying local economy just beyond that perimeter.
Right. You physically walk 2 blocks away from the neon signs off the main commercial strip, and you find a local fondita. It is entirely unassuming. There are plastic chairs, paper napkins, and a crowd of local workers.
Can you order that exact same traditional bandeja paisa?
And if you are unfamiliar with this dish, brace yourself. It was designed to fuel farmers working 14-hour days in the mountains. It is a staggering mountain of calories.
What's actually on the plate?
You get a massive bed of white rice, rich red beans, an enormous strip of fried pork belly, a thick chorizo sausage, a fried egg sitting on top of the rice, sweet plantains, a quarter of a fresh avocado, and crispy chicharron.
It is an absolute agricultural powerhouse.
And at that local fondita, sitting on a plastic chair, that entire massive plate of food costs you between $5 and $8. That is roughly 20,000 to 25,000 pesos. The disparity is insane.
Analyzing that massive price gap reveals a stark truth about the city's 2026 economy. When you pay $18 for a bandeja paisa in El Poblado, you are not paying for higher quality beans or superior pork belly.
You are paying a premium for the interior design, the bilingual waitstaff, and the algorithmic popularity of the real estate. The foundational cost of food production in Colombia is actually incredibly low.
Which is incredibly obvious if you look at the grocery supply chain. If you decide to go the family or digital nomad route and cook your own meals, you'll become very familiar with the Éxito supermarket chain.
Éxito is ubiquitous. It functions similarly to a Walmart or a large-scale Target, anchoring commercial centers across the entire metro area. And the affordability of raw ingredients is striking.
We looked at the receipt data from several expat cost of living blogs in our stack.
Yeah, and if you walk into an Éxito and execute a one-person weekly haul stocking up on fresh, locally grown produce, a large carton of eggs, premium Colombian coffee beans, chicken breasts, rice, the works, your final total at the register will reliably hit between $30 and $45 USD. That is for 7 solid days of nutrition.
However, you don't travel to a dynamic city just to cook in your apartment every night. There is a thriving premium dining sector.
Absolutely. And the crown jewel of that sector is Mercado del Rio. It is this massive, beautifully repurposed warehouse space turned into an upscale food hall. You have dozens of high-end culinary vendors, specialized wine bars, and local craft breweries all operating under one roof.
And even in this premium, highly curated environment, a fantastic night out with multiple plates and drinks is only going to set you back about $50 to $25 per person.
We also need to address the cultural cornerstone of the country.
Yeah.
The coffee and the associated tipping etiquette. It's Colombia. Coffee is not just a beverage. It is a religion and a primary export.
What did you find so surprising about the coffee costs?
It completely broke my brain that you can walk into a genuinely brilliant, artisanal, local cafe places that roast their own beans and weigh the water on digital scales, and a world-class espresso is going to cost you between $1 and $2.
With costs that remarkably low, the immediate question from a foreign visitor is how to handle gratuity. What does the socioeconomic data suggest is the expectation?
The etiquette is clearly delineated. In the heavy tourist zones and nicer restaurants, a 10% tip is generally expected and is almost always added to your final bill automatically.
They call it propina voluntaria, voluntary tip.
Right, but the social contract dictates that you should just pay it without making a fuss. Now, if you are out in a local working-class neighborhood at a fondita or a small cafe where they do not auto-include it, leaving that 10% in cash on the table is highly, highly appreciated, especially given the reality of the local minimum wage.
Having established the micro costs of food and lodging, we need to synthesize this data into segment 6. Let's zoom out and calculate the daily out-of-pocket burn rates so you can practically map your finances.
Let's run the math, starting with the backpacker. If you are ruthlessly prioritizing value and staying in hostels, your daily operating budget is roughly $35 to $50 a day. Let me break down exactly how you survive on that.
Walk us through it.
You spend $20 on a highly rated dorm bed in Laureles. You spend $6 for that massive bandeja paisa lunch we just discussed, which honestly keeps you full until 8 p.m. You grab some local street food for dinner, maybe a couple of empanadas or a cheese-stuffed arepa for $5.
Now, what about getting around?
You spend $2 total utilizing the metro and the cable car. You buy a local Aguila beer from a corner store for $2. And you still have $5 left to cover a museum entry fee or to tip the guide on a free walking tour.
When you lay out that itinerary and realize the sheer volume of urban immersion, caloric intake, and transit you're extracting for under $50, it empirically solidifies Medellin as the best value major city in the Western Hemisphere.
What about our mid-range traveler? The data puts them at $80 to $120 a day per person.
Deploying that budget unlocks a lifestyle that borders on the luxurious.
The breakdown here is fantastic. You and a partner split a beautiful $80 to $100 boutique hotel room, so your share is $40 to $50. You spend $12 on a nice sit-down lunch. You allocate $25 for a fantastic dinner paired with a couple of drinks.
And transportation.
You spend $5 on transit, maybe taking an Uber instead of the metro, and you still have a solid $45 to $65 left over in your daily budget to fund a premium tour. You could go paragliding high above the valley walls or hire a driver to take you out to a working coffee farm.
If you take that exact sequence of activities, boutique hotel, fine dining, private tours, and attempt to execute it in Western Europe or even in the gentrified pockets of Southeast Asia today, the financial data shows you're easily spending double, if not triple, that amount.
Now, let's calculate the family of four. We estimate their footprint at $180 to $250 a day total, covering all four people.
This is where the strategic decision to base the family in an Envigado apartment yields massive financial dividends.
Precisely. You are paying about $110 for that spacious, secure apartment. You spend maybe $50 to $70 total on meals for the day, which involves a smart mix of cooking your own Exodo groceries and eating at reasonably priced local restaurants.
And activities for the kids.
You have $60 to $80 left for a group activity, like taking the kids up the metro cable to explore the nature reserves in Parque Arvi. If you extrapolate that daily burn rate, an entire 7-day family vacation in Medellin costs about $1,400 to $1,800 total, completely excluding your international flights.
In the current global travel market, providing a family of four with an international, culturally dense vacation for under $2,000 a week makes the city a fiercely competitive destination.
And finally, the luxury traveler, operating with $250 to $400 a day. You drop $220 to $280 on a top-tier, architecturally stunning hotel. You spend $80 to $120 on absolute fine dining for two.
You hire private, bespoke, bilingual tour guides for $100 to $150.
And you casually drop $40 to $60 in upscale mixology-focused cocktail bars.
And again, the comparative analytics are the main takeaway. Even operating at this absolute maximum tier of luxury, you are still paying 40 to 50% less than you would for an equivalent day of opulence in Lima, Peru, or Buenos Aires, Argentina.
But there's one more budget we are forced to discuss because it is the primary engine reshaping the entire socioeconomic landscape of the valley, the digital nomad monthly budget.
Right, this is a distinct category.
We are looking at a demographic that moves here, signs a lease, and spends $1,200 to $1,800 a month. And I want you to break down the mechanics of why this is causing so much friction.
The friction stems from a brutal mismatch in purchasing power. First, let's look at the nomad setup. It sounds utopian. They rent a beautiful, fully furnished apartment in Laureles or Envigado for $600, $900 a month.
Or they go to El Poblado.
Right. If they insist on the El Poblado bubble, the market has pushed those units to $900, sometimes over $1,400 a month. They pay $150 to $250 for a dedicated hot desk at a premium co-working facility like Selena or Adam House.
Which, if you are earning a New York or London salary, feels like absolute monopoly money. It's incredibly cheap.
But we have to apply serious economic analysis to what happens when you inject that foreign capital into a local housing market. The influx of remote workers wielding strong U.S. dollars and casually paying $900 a month for an apartment has fundamentally repriced residential real estate.
Right, because landlords are rational actors. They look at a local family paying 1.5 million pesos a month on a long-term lease, and they realize they can double or triple their yield by evicting that family, buying some cheap modern furniture, and listing the unit as a short-term nomad rental on Airbnb.
It creates a devastating cascade effect throughout the urban geography. The local middle class gets systematically priced out of the generational neighborhoods their families built. They are forced to migrate further up the hillsides or outward to the extreme periphery of the city.
Which drastically increases their daily commute times on the metro and severely decreases their overall quality of life. The nomad economy undoubtedly brings valuable foreign capital into the cafes and service sectors, but it extracts a heavy, visible toll on the foundational housing market.
It is a deeply complicated reality, and it leads us directly into segment 7, the logistical hurdles on the ground. Because while the macroeconomics are shifting the city's future, there are immediate operational traps that catch almost every first-time visitor today.
We pulled 3 specific named logistics traps from the source stack. We touched on the first one during the arrival discussion, but let's formalize the mechanism. Trap number 1, the airport distance deception.
The mechanism of this trap relies on purely deceptive geographical marketing by the airlines and booking platforms.
Absolutely. When you buy a ticket, MDE Jose Maria Cordova is heavily marketed as Medellín's airport. But as we established, it is 24 miles away in Rio Negro. And the lived reality of this deception ruins trips in 2 distinct ways.
First, you have budget-conscious travelers who book an Airbnb that proudly advertises itself as close to the airport.
Right. They think they're being incredibly savvy, saving commute time, but they end up spending their entire vacation stranded up on the Rio Negro Plateau, utterly disconnected from the actual city of Medellin.
And the second manifestation of the trap occurs during departure, specifically concerning the topography of the Las Palmas Highway.
Yes. Let's say you have an 8 a.m. flight back to Miami. You do the math in your head. Okay, it's a 45-minute drive. I'll leave my hotel in El Poblado at 6 a.m., plenty of time.
And what happens?
You get in the Uber, and you immediately hit catastrophic morning rush hour traffic as thousands of vehicles try to crawl out of the valley basin. Suddenly, that theoretical 45-minute drive takes 90 excruciating minutes. You miss your international flight.
The protocol to avoid this is non-negotiable. You must mathematically budget a full 2 hours for the physical journey from your hotel lobby to the airline check-in desk. You should exclusively utilize ride-sharing apps like Uber, rather than flagging a street taxi for those early morning high-stakes runs, because the algorithm locks in the pricing at $18 to $25 and provides GPS tracking.
Furthermore, if you are flying a domestic route, perhaps jumping over to Bogota or up to the coast in Cartagena, you must meticulously verify your ticket. Medellin operates a secondary, smaller airport called Enrique Olaya Herrera, airport code EOH, which is located directly inside the city limits on the valley floor.
If your ticket says EOH and you endure the hour-long drive up the mountain to MDE, your itinerary is ruined.
Okay, trap number 2, the El Poblado bubble. We talked about the aesthetic, but I want to dive into the mechanism of how people get stuck there.
The mechanism is what urban analysts call algorithmic default.
That is the perfect term for it. When you decide to visit, you open a search engine or a hotel booking app and type where to stay in Medellin. The algorithm, which optimizes for past booking density and high-rated reviews, overwhelmingly feeds you El Poblado. It becomes the path of least resistance.
And it achieves that algorithmic dominance because it is, objectively speaking, heavily policed, highly walkable, and visually engineered for the specific aspect ratios of social media platforms.
But the trap is that by surrendering to the algorithm and staying inside that bubble, you are geographically isolating yourself from the actual culture of the city. You end up eating at restaurants that have reverse-engineered their menus to suit your foreign palate, and you drink at bars populated entirely by people who flew on the exact same airplane as you.
And as we discussed with the nomad economics, your demand within that specific grid has caused a 40% rent spike, actively pushing the local Colombians out.
So what is the actionable, pragmatic fix for the listener who is feeling a bit intimidated?
The recommended fix from the travel literature is a hybrid integration strategy. If you are a nervous traveler, or if this is your very first foray into South America, there is no shame in booking your first 1 or 2 nights in El Poblado.
Utilize it as a soft landing zone.
Exactly. Use it to orient your internal compass, recover from jet lag, and establish a baseline feeling of safety. But the critical step is that you must eventually check out. You take your bags, you utilize the metro system, which is a highly efficient 15-minute ride, and you physically relocate your base of operations to a neighborhood like Lourdes, Envigado, or Belén.
That physical relocation is the only way you gain real access to the city's pulse. Which brings us to trap number 3, and I want to be incredibly clear. This is the most serious, life-altering topic we will discuss today. Trap 3 is the drink spiking risk.
Yes, we have to address this with absolute honesty because the glossy influencer videos completely ignore the dark underbelly of the nightlife economy.
The mechanism of this trap revolves around a specific, highly dangerous pharmacological substance called scopolamine, which the local population refers to as burundanga.
It is a deeply insidious and terrifying substance. When administered, which is almost exclusively done by slipping it into an unattended beverage, it does not function like a standard sedative that simply knocks the victim unconscious.
Right. What does this chemical actually do to the human brain?
It induces a state of extreme waking compliance, coupled with severe anterograde amnesia.
A chemical compliance protocol, meaning you're awake, your eyes are open, but your free will is completely erased.
Precisely. You will actively and calmly cooperate with the criminals who drugged you. You will physically walk to an ATM and drain your own bank accounts. You will hand over your unlocked phone. You will recite your passwords, and you will lead them back to your hotel room.
And because of the amnesiac properties, when the drug finally metabolizes and wears off hours or days later, you will have absolutely zero memory of participating in your own robbery.
It is the stuff of nightmares. But looking at the police data in our source stack, we need to clarify the target demographic. This is not a random threat. This isn't happening to a family of 4 walking through a botanical garden at noon.
That is a crucial distinction. This is highly organized, highly targeted criminal activity. Geographically, it is hyper-concentrated in the specific nightlife and entertainment zones, predominantly around Parque Arvi and the Provenza sector in El Poblado.
And demographically, the overwhelming, statistically significant majority of victims are solo male travelers.
Why is that specific demographic so vulnerable?
Because the delivery mechanism of the drug heavily relies on exploiting a romantic or social setup. The syndicates operating these scams utilize location-based dating apps to match with foreign tourists.
They establish rapport, they agree to meet at a bar, or alternatively, the victim accepts a drink from a seemingly friendly, attractive stranger approaching them in a crowded club.
The moment the drink is consumed, the trap is successfully sprung.
So how do you mitigate this? What are the defensive rules?
You must completely discard the Medellín is totally safe influencer narrative when engaging in the nightlife economy, and you must operate with strict, uncompromising defensive protocols. Rule 1. You never, under any circumstances, leave a beverage unattended.
Rule 2. You do not accept a drink from a stranger unless you maintained unbroken eye contact with the bartender as they poured it and handed it directly to you.
Rule 3. You completely cease the use of location-based dating apps to arrange immediate isolated encounters with strangers in nightlife settings. You go out in trusted groups, and you restrict your patronage to highly reviewed, well-lit venues with visible security.
If you adhere to those protocols, the statistical risk drops to near zero. And that terrifying reality is exactly why we need to unpack Segment 8, the broader safety picture, because we have to paint an honest, nuanced portrait of urban security.
Let's revisit that 11.7 per 100,000 homicide rate. It is essential to contextualize that number. We discussed the State Department's Level 3 advisory and how it is driven by rural border region militancy.
Right. They aren't issuing a national Level 3 warning because someone might steal your iPhone in El Poblado.
Correct. The geopolitical risks involving organized crime syndicates in the remote jungle corridors are entirely divorced from the daily reality of the urban center.
So pushing the jungle out of our minds, what are the actual tangible risks you face walking down the street in Medellín?
The most prevalent, mathematically likely risk you face is opportunistic street crime, specifically the snatch and grab theft of high-end smartphones.
And reading through the forums and the local advice, it is so easily preventable. It relies on tourists lacking situational awareness. The cardinal rule is incredibly simple. Stop walking and texting.
Do not stand on a busy, crowded street corner holding a $1,000 iPhone out in front of you like a beacon.
If you are lost and need to check Google Maps, you step inside a cafe, you check your route, you put the phone securely in your front pocket, and then you resume walking.
Beyond the phone theft and the severe nightlife spiking risks we detailed, the primary danger is opportunistic robbery, resulting from wandering outside of the designated, secure tourist corridors.
Which brings up the map of the no-go zones. Where should the listener absolutely refuse to go?
The geographical data is very clear. You do not venture into Comuna 1 or Comuna 2. These are dense, historically marginalized neighborhoods located high up on the far northern hillsides.
They possess absolutely zero tourist infrastructure and lack the heavy police presence that secures the valley floor.
Furthermore, you completely avoid the area surrounding the Barbacoas market in the downtown sector after sunset. And as a blanket operational rule, you do not wander aimlessly into any unfamiliar, unguided area of the metropolitan grid after 10:00 p.m.
Okay, I want to pivot and look at the safety data specifically concerning solo female travelers, because the reports in our research stack are actually wildly counterintuitive.
They are. The aggregated sentiment data from solo female travel networks consistently rates daytime operations in Medellín as feeling significantly safer and more comfortable than comparable urban centers in parts of Southeast Asia or even certain European capitals.
The reasoning makes sense. During daylight hours, the primary commercial and tourist zones are incredibly vibrant. There are multi-generational local families everywhere, the pedestrian infrastructure is generally good, and there is a highly visible, heavily armed police presence on almost every major corner.
But the massive caveat in the data is the nightlife. The operational rules change drastically the moment the sun drops below the Andes.
A solo female traveler must strictly and meticulously plan her nightlife exits. You absolutely do not stand on a curb and hail random unverified street taxis at 2 a.m.
You utilize verified ride-sharing applications that track your GPS coordinates. You wait inside the venue until the car arrives. You remain in well-lit, heavily populated areas. And ideally, you coordinate your movements with a trusted group of fellow travelers.
And touching briefly on family safety, we spend a lot of time on Envigado, but the literature really does crown it as the ultimate sanctuary.
It thrives as a family destination precisely because of its urban design. It features exceptionally wide streets, massive, well-maintained public parks, and a total absence of the late-night party infrastructure that generates chaos in other districts.
If we shift our analytical focus away from the defensive precautions, we can finally examine the segment 9, the massive cultural payoffs. We have to discuss the best moments and the honest disappointments.
Yes. Let's start with the best moments, because when the urban design of Medellín works, it is an unbelievable experience. We briefly touched on Metro Cable Line K earlier.
Riding that gondola network for $1 into a cloud forest reserve remains one of the most profound, accessible urban experiences on the continent.
It is pure magic. You sit in this quiet cabin and you literally lift off from the dense concrete valley floor. You float silently over the intricate maze of tin roofs and brick walls of the Comunas, gaining altitude, and then suddenly, the dense urban sprawl simply ends.
It just stops, and you are gliding over this massive, silent expanse of ancient green trees as you enter Parque Arvi. It is an incredible juxtaposition. But there is another Camina experience that is absolutely mandatory. Camina 13 on a Sunday afternoon.
The sociological transformation of Camina 13 is arguably one of the most studied, most successful urban renewal projects of the entire 21st century.
Let's give the listeners the historical context from the source stack, because without it, you're just looking at stairs. In the early 2000s, specifically around 2002 during Operation Orion, Camina 13 was the violent, bleeding epicenter of the city's conflict.
We are talking about literal military operations. Black Hawk helicopters firing into the hillsides, devastating street-to-street militia fighting. It was a war zone.
And what does that exact same geographical footprint look like today?
Today, it operates as a vibrant, pulsating, globally recognized hub of art and culture. You take the metro and transfer to a local bus for a combined cost of about $2, and you arrive at the base of these massive outdoor public escalators.
The city literally built heavy-duty escalators directly into the steep hillside to replace hundreds of exhausting, dangerous concrete stairs, instantly improving the daily lives of the residents. And surrounding these mechanical lifelines is an absolute explosion of color.
Stunning, multi-story graffiti murals that serve as a visual history of the neighborhood's trauma and resilience. You have massive crowds gathering around local hip-hop crews, breakdancing on the concrete landings. The kinetic energy is electric.
But the critical directive from our research is that you cannot simply walk through the neighborhood, snap photos for your social media, and leave. That is extractive tourism. You must hire a local resident guide.
A comprehensive guided walking tour runs approximately $20 to $35 USD. That capital goes directly into the microeconomy of the neighborhood, and more importantly, the guide provides the necessary historical depth and context to ensure you actually understand the gravity of the murals you are looking at.
Okay, moving outside the city limits for another best moment, Guatapé. This is universally listed as the essential day trip.
It is the defining iconic image of the Antioquia region outside of the urban basin.
You navigate to the northern bus terminal in Medellín, buy a ticket for maybe $8 to $12, and take a winding 2-hour ride through the countryside. And suddenly, you are confronted with El Peñón.
It is this massive geological anomaly, a 650-foot solid granite monolith just bursting vertically out of the earth, sitting right on the edge of an incredibly intricate, sprawling reservoir system.
You pay a trivial $4 entry fee, and then you have to earn the view. You climb 649 steep, zigzagging concrete steps that have been laced directly into a massive crack in the side of the rock. Your lungs burn, your legs ache, but when you finally drag yourself to the summit, the 360-degree panoramic views of this flooded lake district are genuinely stunning.
And once you descend, you can rent a kayak down in the reservoir water for about $10 an hour. When you aggregate the transportation, the entry fees, the local lunch, and the activities, the entire unforgettable day trip runs you an incredibly manageable $40 to $60 total.
And if you have the luxury of an extra night in your itinerary, the source materials heavily push the Asia Cafetero, the coffee farms.
This region is tragically overlooked by visitors who allow the inertia of the city bubble to hold them captive.
Right. The data suggests taking an overnight trip south to a vibrant, colorful town like Salento. For a package price of $55 to $85, you cover your bus transport, you receive an incredibly detailed guided educational tour of a working multi-generational coffee finca, you participate in a professional tasting, and you are served a beautiful farm-to-table local lunch.
You spend hours walking through the lush, impossibly green Andean hills where some of the finest, most chemically complex coffee on the planet is cultivated. It is a completely different rhythm of life compared to the city.
It is remarkable. However, our mandate is to provide an honest, unvarnished verdict, which means we are obligated to turn our analytical lens toward the honest disappointments.
And we have to start with that Bangkok or Bali feel. If you find yourself standing on a street corner in El Poblado on a Saturday night, bathed in the glow of neon lights, voluntarily paying $15 for a mediocre cocktail, and trying to shout over the aggressive deep house music to a crowd composed entirely of English speakers, you are going to feel a profound sense of geographical detachment.
You are going to realize you are not really in Colombia.
It is the ultimate paradox of successful global tourism. People will endure flights spanning thousands of miles, ostensibly to experience the friction and beauty of a foreign culture, only to immediately congregate in a hyper-commercialized, heavily engineered zone that perfectly replicates the exact comforts, aesthetics, and pricing of their home countries.
And the second disappointment is much heavier and much more difficult to digest: the gentrification tension.
This requires a highly thoughtful, objective discussion, because as a visitor moving through this space in 2026, you cannot ethically or visually ignore it. The economic displacement is physically obvious on the street level.
It truly is. You can walk down a residential street situated just one block adjacent to the new luxury boutiques, and you watch the displacement happening in real time.
You see the traditional family-run corner store, the local tienda that has supplied that block with produce and gossip for 30 years, boarded up, waiting to be gutted by contractors and transformed into a sleek, minimalist co-working space.
You see generational families packing moving trucks, forced to leave the neighborhood they built because an international investment LLC bought their entire apartment block to chop it up into short-term, high-yield Airbnbs.
Observing that physical transformation forces you to confront the reality of your own economic footprint. Your presence brings highly valuable, much-needed foreign capital to the city, which undeniably creates thousands of service sector jobs.
But simultaneously, your demand for housing and amenities actively contributes to the pricing out of the very people who built the authentic culture you ostensibly traveled there to consume. It is a deeply complex economic reality.
So if that heavy socioeconomic tension feels like too much for your vacation, or if you simply want to utilize the comparative data in our source stack to see what else Colombia offers, let's examine segment 10, the alternatives.
Let's say you want to experience the country, but the specific dynamics of Medellín don't align with your vibe. Alternative 1, the capital city, Bogotá.
Bogotá is the definitive play if you are seeking the sheer, overwhelming scale and the deep historical gravity of a major Latin American capital.
Let's profile the reality of being there. First of all, it is incredibly high. The city sits at 8,660 feet in altitude. That means the cheat code climate is gone. It is significantly colder than Medellín.
You absolutely must pack a proper jacket and be prepared for chilly, overcast days. And frankly, I would argue the altitude sickness is a real factor you have to manage for the first 48 hours.
The altitude is a hurdle, but the cultural depth available in Bogotá is immense and unparalleled in the country. The historical assets are incredible. You have the Candelaria district, which is this beautifully preserved old town packed with authentic colonial architecture and government palaces.
You have the Gold Museum, which is objectively a world-class institution housing thousands of pre-Columbian artifacts.
And you have the legendary Sunday Ciclovia, where the city literally shuts down 75 miles of major urban streets to all vehicle traffic, and millions of residents come out to ride bikes, walk their dogs, and eat street food.
And from a financial perspective, the costs are highly reasonable.
Mm.
Our data indicates a mid-range daily budget in Bogotá sits comfortably around $60 to $90. Furthermore, the logistical friction of getting there is minimal. You can easily catch a one-way domestic flight from Medellín for a mere $30 to $60.
So what is the honest head-to-head comparison between the two cities?
Bogotá is undeniably a harder, more abrasive city to navigate. It lacks the seamless, highly efficient valley metro system that defines Medellín's mobility. The vehicle traffic in Bogotá is notoriously brutal, often gridlocked for hours.
And visually, it lacks the immediate, lush green beauty of Medellín's deep mountain setting.
However, it is culturally more complex. It possesses the serious bureaucratic weight of a true capital city, and crucially, because it lacks the eternal spring weather, it is significantly less saturated by the transient digital nomad and influencer demographics.
Okay, let's look at alternative 2, Cartagena. And I will tell you right now, the contrast here is jarring.
Cartagena represents the exact opposite end of the Colombian spectrum. This is the destination specifically engineered for the traveler seeking the iconic Caribbean coast contrast.
It is the absolute showpiece of the country's tourism marketing. You have the stunning UNESCO-designated walled city featuring these perfectly preserved colonial buildings with colorful wooden balconies cascading with bright flowers.
You have the immediate proximity to the Caribbean Sea. But the physical toll of the climate is intense. The data shows it sits at a sweltering 88 degrees Fahrenheit year-round, accompanied by a heavy, suffocating blanket of coastal humidity.
And you pay a significant financial premium to access that specific Caribbean postcard aesthetic. The budget data confirms it. Mid-range operating costs in Cartagena immediately jump to $100 to $60 a day.
The domestic flights from Medellín will run you between $60 and $120. And if you want to escape the murky city beaches and do the highly recommended speedboat trip out to the pristine Rosario Islands, that excursion is going to cost an additional $30 to $50.
Synthesizing the comparative data, the honest assessment is that Cartagena is highly polished, heavily commercialized to extract maximum revenue from cruise ship passengers and luxury tourists, and undeniably more expensive across the board.
Medellín is much rawer. It is vastly cheaper on a day-to-day basis, but it requires, and ultimately rewards, a genuine investment of your time and effort to figure out its complex urban rhythms.
Which brings us to segment 11, the final, ultimate objective of this deep dive, the Is It Worth It matrix. We have processed the data, we have examined the sociology, and now we are going to deliver a final definitive verdict for every single traveler profile.
Let's start with the backpacker, analyzing the raw value-to-experience ratio. For the backpacker, the verdict is a resounding yes.
Absolutely yes. Operating at $35 to $50 a day, it remains the absolute best value proposition in the Americas. Think about the sheer density of what you get for that money. Seamless and heavily subsidized metro rides, $1 cable cars floating over the mountains, massive 1,500-calorie local lunches for $6, and incredibly cheap museum access.
Honestly, just walking through the leafy streets of Laureles on a random weekday evening, buying a cheap beer from a corner store, and simply watching the local life unfold is arguably the best free entertainment on the continent.
But there is a strict behavioral condition attached to that affirmative verdict. If you commit to going, you must promise not to lock yourself into the El Poblado dorms. Go to El Poblado for one night, party, see the neon lights, sure, but then you must physically move your base.
If you stay in Laureles or Envigado, your trip will generate authentic stories that you'll be telling for years. If you stay in the bubble, you will just have stories about other backpackers.
Moving to the next bracket, what is the verdict derived from the data for the mid-range traveler?
The mid-range verdict is yes. The value at that price point is exceptional.
For $80 to $120 a day, you are living a lifestyle that borders on royalty. You are waking up to rooftop infinity pools and eating incredible multi-course dinners. But the caveat here is that you must beware the El Poblado markup.
If you refuse to walk those 2 extra blocks and only eat at the highly branded tourist-facing restaurants on the main strip, you are voluntarily subjecting yourself to a 40 to 60% markup on every transaction. That sheer laziness completely destroys the core value proposition of the city.
Let's assess the data for the family verdict. Yes, it is a highly, highly underrated destination for families.
But the geographical constraint is absolute. It is only a yes if you base yourself in the quiet safety of Envigado or Sabaneta.
For $1,400 to $1,800 a week total, you are securing an incredibly safe, highly comfortable, and culturally enriching family vacation that will absolutely ruin you for overpriced domestic travel.
And what does the analysis yield for the luxury verdict?
The verdict is yes, but you have to seriously recalibrate your expectations of what luxury means in this specific context.
Explain the parameters of that recalibration.
For $250 to $400 a day, you are undeniably securing premium, world-class physical comfort, avant-garde interior design, and exceptional gastronomy. But you must remember that your luxury hotel is not an isolated, pristine resort in the Maldives.
It is a building dropped into the middle of a massive, breathing, aggressively noisy South American metropolis.
You will hear the roar of motorcycle traffic. When you look out the floor-to-ceiling windows of your penthouse suite, you will see the stark, visible economic inequality of the hillside comunas staring right back at you. There is real, unavoidable city friction.
If you demand pristine, sterile isolation, do not book the flight. If you want high-end luxury combined with raw, kinetic, urban energy, book it immediately.
Finally, we must deliver the digital nomad verdict. Based on the sheer volume of amenities and the climate data, it is a YES. It is the undisputed heavyweight capital of Latin America for remote workers right now.
But given the sociological data we reviewed, we have to issue a hard, uncompromising caveat here.
We absolutely do. If you are a remote worker deciding to move your laptop to Medellín, you have to look in the mirror and understand that you are the primary driver of gentrification. Your financial presence is the exact mechanism spiking the rents and altering the neighborhoods.
Therefore, the ethical mandate, if you decide to extract value from this city, is to actively and deliberately participate in the local economy.
Do not just hand your strong foreign currency to an international venture-backed co-working corporation and an overseas Airbnb host. Spend locally. Rent your apartment directly from Colombian owners. Eat your lunches at the independent fonditas. Learn the language and tip generously.
And processing all of these sources leads to a broader final reflection on the mechanics of modern travel itself. We are living in an era where global algorithms dictate almost every movement we make. They tell us exactly which neighborhood to sleep in, exactly which aesthetic cafe to eat in, and exactly which geographical coordinates to stand on to take our photos. We have to seriously ask ourselves, are we actually visiting new countries? Or are we simply traveling thousands of miles to visit the internet's physical footprint? The travelers who will extract the most genuine value and meaning from Medellín in 2026 are the ones who possess the agency to actively challenge the algorithm, who deliberately step off the heavily curated path, and who go looking for the raw, unpolished version of their destination that does not exist on a glowing screen.
If this gave you the honest verdict you needed, follow the show. New episodes drop every day.
That is the honest verdict from Phil and H.